So IXDA Cincinnati is a local chapter of the Interaction Design Association, which is actually an international organization. We've been up and running in Cincinnati for the past 13 years. And we're basically a group of passionate designers, user experience enthusiasts, interaction design professionals, and we're just really dedicated to trying to foster collaboration, knowledge sharing, pushing the boundary of what's possible in the world of interaction design. So our events are just opportunities to grow, connect with each other who share the passion and interest in creating user experiences. So if you're a seasoned pro or just starting on your journey, you're definitely in the right place tonight. Also got a fantastic lineup of speakers on our panel, our Introspection on AI panel. And this is also sort of dovetailing with the World Interaction Day, the theme of which this year is ethics, equity, and responsibility.
Excited that you guys are able to kind of be the swan song of our events. We love IXDA. We have lots of folks that are very active participants in all the events. Amy and Chris have invited a lot of our folks to be a part of whether it's panelists or whether it's just attendees. We're an agency of about 13,000 people across the globe, headquartered in Kansas City, and we've got about 40 people here in town. We work with some of the biggest brands in the world, connecting brands, whether it's brand experience, customer experience, and commerce. We essentially, our mantra is creating connected brands that people love. And I think that spans to basically anybody who's in this room and thinking about design, whether it's UX, whether it's UI, interactions, motion, you're in the right place. And so we're very excited to have you all here, very excited to welcome in our panelists. And again, thank you to Amy for allowing us to be the host for the event and to be part of it. Enjoy.
Thanks so much, Nick.
My name is Keith Instone. I'm a research analyst at an IT consulting company called Stratascale. My job is basically to study emerging tech trends and try to translate that into what it means for customers, employees, supplier experiences and that, right? So helping companies get excited about technology, then think about the human part of it as well, right? One of those, of course, is AI. 2 years ago, I didn't know anything about AI, but I guess I'm an expert now, right? Just like everybody else, right, is an expert at AI now. I'm also active in Ohio X, which is a statewide nonprofit that's trying to build Ohio into a tech hub. So I've been going to different AI forums around the state that the lieutenant governor and college presidents have set up. And so I can share some stories of things that I've heard here in Cincinnati, Cleveland, and other places.
Hi, I'm Brian Yamada. I'm a Chief Innovation Officer for VML-Y&R. I'm based in Kansas City, so good to be in Cincinnati. I guess my role is probably twofold. One is trying to make real all the crazy stuff that our creative teams dream up, and try to figure out what's actually possible. And then there's the client side of trying to help them understand like what do we do with these emerging technologies, and AI is definitely right in the center of that. I've been with the agency since 1999, which is weird to say out loud, but quite a long time, and feel like I've lived through a lot of the different sort of digital eras that have happened, and now we're in this massive summer of AI.
My name is David McCoy. I'm with Engaged Partners. We're an IT consulting company here in Cincinnati down on Riverside. Roughly 100 consultants, mostly developers. I am a user experience research person. Let's go with that. I was on a panel a couple months ago and they didn't have chairs, so thank you for providing chairs. We're doing a panel when you're standing up, yeah. But now I have this, right? So, sometime in February, I became aware of ChatGPT, which I'm sure many of you have utilized or heard about. And we have a Slack channel in Engage, so I started up a Slack channel, an AI Slack channel. And leadership was like, what's happening here? So we created a task force and primarily focused on a policy that we created around protecting Engage, obviously, but also, obviously, we want to protect our clients and not put sensitive information into these tools. So policy was kind of one of the big things. The other was focusing on experiments. We had developers on the task force myself, and they focused on dev tools. I focused on some of the prototyping tools that are emerging out there, and also using Chat GPT to do user interview scripts and things like that, kind of getting away from the blank page to something. And so that's kind of been my journey the last, 8 months or so.
For us, it's I think we're at this stage that you can look at almost any problem as an AI problem. And whether that's research and analysis, whether that's trying to have an artificial intelligence pretend it's a person, feed it the information of a persona and bring that to life so a creative team can have a conversation or design team can have a conversation, to think about problems like translation, problems like global production. There are so many different potential use cases. I think the harder part is figuring out where to start, more so than where could this be used and how to use it responsibly, and how to fit those in. So we're looking across the board in everything that we do, and I feel like most of the clients that I feel like I'm talking to are figuring out that prioritization and use case portion of the problem. Everybody's curious and they're trying to understand, like, where do we begin that can actually start to drive value?
The surveys I've seen, business leaders list automation in order to save money as the number one reason that they're exploring AI, which is not surprising. But better experiences, innovation, those are some things that are lower on the list. Right now, most business folks are like, cool, I can shave time and save money with these awesome tools. That's their number one thing right now.
I'm just kind of reaching a point lately where it's like I get stuck with something and I'm like, I can ask that thing. So that's one benefit right off the bat, and it's very handy at work and at home. If my kids ask me a geometry question, I'm like, hold on. So one thing I did with a client that I'm working with here recently is kind of frame up their customer segments, because they're a pretty small organization, but like any organization, there's PDFs and PowerPoint files, and everyone has their little silo of things. So it was an effort to kind of at least start the conversation and frame what each of these 4 segments looks like as a starting point, knowing and being transparent, like this is all placeholder, but let's start talking about this. Where in the past that would have taken, weeks, it took a couple hours max to just kind of frame that up. So just the quickness of it is very enticing. I think there's a lot of opportunity, like even with these platforms that are coming out, like Watson X, of being able to kind of enterprise this is kind of interesting. I think there was kind of a huge push in the earlier part of this year with all this. I'm kind of amazed with what you all have accomplished. But I think we're kind of pausing a little bit. It just feels like everyone's kind of looking at things and going, hold up. On LinkedIn, all these tools are emerging, whether they're AI specific or integrations with AI. And it's a little overwhelming, all the products that are kind of emerging as far as like which way to go with all of that. So the Watson X thing is interesting because it can standardize an organization. That they make it sound really simple in their advertising too. It's governance, AI, and data. The data part is second in their list, but like connecting all of that data, their biggest client is SAP, which if you've been at a company that has rolled out SAP, that takes years. So I think it's going to probably move as a little bit slower than I think it will for a lot of larger organizations whose their mainframe is like, we built this in 1974 and we have all of these products on top of it, and some of them have this data from the mainframe, some don't. And like getting all of that into one place where it can be utilized with artificial intelligence will be near impossible probably for some organizations because of cost and time. So I just think it's interesting what's happening with that right now. I've been thinking and looking into that quite a bit.
Just kind of curious in terms of like those of you who are using it for those purposes, like where you feel the real strengths are at right now. Like for instance, I use Dovetail, the research repository tool, and it's just recently incorporated, some AI to do. At this point, just kind of curious what types of experience you've had in the user research realm.
We have 3 user experience researchers. So we're kind of growing still versus like 11 designers on the team. And so because of that maturity level that they're at, we're getting a lot of requests that are like, can we do some research like next week? And it's like, okay, maybe, let's see what we can do. And so the ability to use these tools to, kind of define what the project is, define the timeline even, the parameters of like, we have this much time, scheduling things out. These tools are good at kind of providing at least a starting point. It's definitely good to review your work and make sure you're not just, here, manager that I report to, I made this, and make sure that you're actually validating everything that you're creating and making sure that it makes sense, obviously. And curating that to where it's usable. Outside of research, I've used a prototyping tool called IXDA or something. They're out of Denmark. It's not the best name for a product. I can't pronounce it still, but it's text prompt. So I need wireframes for your e-commerce website. It will generate that for you. It will generate content for those pages. And so it's not perfect. The high fidelity is definitely lacking, but they're kind of a scrappy startup, I think, that's kind of moving towards that. So that's been interesting to play with that tool as well.
Yeah, we're using it in similar ways. I think from and all the big data problems, I do think it's interesting to try to look at things like transcripts and so forth. We are using tools that are helping look at predictions of an interface. So where will eyes go? When designers are starting to explore new versions of a website or banner ads, or even like retail components, there are lots of software now that can predict just based upon all the aggregated data they've had, like what will catch attention, what type of emotion will this image or that image have. So, I mean, those types of tools are very useful for design. We're using it a lot in the sort of early concepting phase. It does help with rapid iteration to try to come up with something you can get to a research-ready area. So it does help with that speed. But those aren't, especially the non-commercially safe ones, those aren't necessarily things we would launch, but they're helpful in helping.
Yeah, I'll just add one more thing that I think might be promising with tools like ChatGPT. If you do the right prompt engineering, you can make it take on a persona and answer your questions from a certain point of view. So, if you're good at it, then you could ask it, I don't know, what would 20-year-old Bulgarian women like to buy for Christmas or whatever? I don't know, right? But you could have them take on that persona and you can get an answer. Should you go off and act on that? No, of course not, because you still should triangulate with other qualitative data, quantitative data, but it gives you this new sort of place to get some of these things. And of course, you have to realize it's all coming from the crazy internet, right? So if there happen to be a bunch of Bulgarian women on these websites doing crazy stuff, then you're going to get that answer, right? So, but it is another way to sort of get input on how the internet has captured people's behavior, right? And so I would just add that as another tool to try it out. But of course, I heard of other folks like, cool, I don't have to do any user research anymore. I type in 2 sentences in the ChatGPT and out pops 18 personas and we now start building. I don't recommend that, but certainly add it as another tool to help you figure out what makes people tick.
That's actually a nice segue into my next question. So what do you think are some of the biggest watch outs in terms of leveraging the technology?
For our large enterprise clients, early on that they uploaded a bunch of proprietary information into these tools, not realizing that they just released it on the internet, right? So, so now there's a bunch of startups that are making stuff enterprise ready. So for me, being aware of the information that's going into the large language model, right? And so for me, I want to swap out a bunch of stuff and swap in new things, right? Pipe in all of our corporate content or whatever and see what happens. So for me, that's the biggest risk is all that content that it's using to build the models. that's now a black box once it does its model magic, right? And so I want to be able to like delete it and see what happens, right? Delete half of it and now see what happens. So to me, that's the biggest risk.
Yeah, responsible AI use, definitely a big item. So for companies that don't have that framework in place, get one. There are plenty of frameworks out there that you can use as a starting point. I think having a explainable AI approach also important, to make sure that your teams, that your lawyers understand what's at play, who's interacting with AI in what capacity. So we have ways that we're sort of map that journey, same way that you would map sort of a customer experience journey. Map the systems and the interactions, because there's a vast difference if you're automating the inputs into via API versus having a human being take data and drop it into a prompt and then being very clear on what the data inputs and outputs are. That's super useful in helping to make sure that the lawyers actually understand what you're talking about, and making sure that they're comfortable before something's rolling through. We think it's also useful to think about sort of front of house, back of house. So where humans are in the loop in a back of house way, and people are reviewing something before it goes, like the level of risk is much lower. So when things are front of house, if you're doing customer facing chatbots, if you're allowing people to interact directly with an artificial intelligence, it's creating a generative response, creating a generative image, the level of risk is significantly higher. So as you're mapping, trying to understand like who's interacting in what capacity, whether that's your audience or whether that's your employees, we think those are super useful ways to make sure that you're mitigating some of the risks that exist. Hallucinations are a massive thing, so a lot of that gets into the system design. There are ways to interrogate, to build custom data references so that you're only looking at that data set. So you're building off of the large language model, but creating interactions that are just referencing Bulgarian women that are shopping, as an example, right? But you have to develop some of those custom, and that's where you kind of move from tools that are launched, where anybody can access in just a prompt window, or new features that are launched in whether it's research platforms or design platforms, to needing to pair up the geeks with the subject matter experts. So whether it's data engineers and data scientists that are trying to understand the solution space you're getting to, and then being able to architect the interactions and the data set in the right way for that.
Kind of to what Brian mentioned, I've talked about policy. I think that's a good thing to have in play, so that people you're working with have expectations on what the parameters are, on what you can do and what you should not do. If you're working with clients, understanding what their policy is also another thing to do. Bias is another thing that comes to mind, which we've probably heard about that 1,000 times, but I tested out mid-journey. I wanted to kind of see what would happen if I plugged in, give me a picture of C-level people at a desk. So I took all the C-level roles after looking in Chat GPT as to what those are, because there's quite a few. There were 28 images generated total, 24 were white men who were between the age of 30 to 60, I guess. 3 females, also all white, and then 1 person who appeared Hispanic or Latino. So just keeping an eye on what you're getting and making sure this might be pulling representative data or close to it. That doesn't mean that's what you should work with all the time. I'll just leave it at that. So there's interesting things that are being generated from this, but it doesn't have feelings. It doesn't have a personality. It's a machine. And just being aware of what you're getting and making sure that you're being equitable with what you're getting out of it.
I mean, we're behind in just basic data privacy in the States. So, but the EU's already looking at regulation for this. So if you're working at a global company, it's a new level of law to be aware of. And I think good practice, especially if you have AI forward applications where you do have people that are interacting with AI, just to be just very open and transparent with your audience, and make sure that they understand what they're interacting with, what data you're pulling from them, and what they're going to get back from that.
I'd like to dig in a little bit more to your approaches or process when it comes to exploring AI. And I think it's a little bit about almost a design thinking approach, the crazy eights and the different activities you're doing with your clients. Just wondering if that type of design thinking happens to factor into any of anyone else's approach to it, or what are kind of the major components of your approach?
Sometimes we're just trying to explore what the technology can do. So there are times we're starting tech first, just to understand like what can we do with this API, where the exploration is very much just about trying to stretch and understand what's possible. But we very much follow, I would say, that think make methodology, and the faster you can move through those cycles, I think it's very true and important with AI, is the faster you can get to proof of concept, that everybody understands the data sets that you're using, can understand sort of the value of the interaction or the output that's coming through. The faster that back and forth happens, the quicker you are to get to something that's useful. And the quicker you can understand like whether there's risk at all in something that's being deployed. So very much use that sort of think make cycle as a part of this, and move through the typical sort of proof of concepts, MVP, like typical development stages. I do think, and I'd echo the scrutiny that you need to take. It's easy to blow by stage gates and things like websites where everybody's in on the joke and you kind of know how all that works. I think it's super important in emerging technologies like this to be much more cautious and respectful as you're moving through each of those POCs, MVPs, prototypes, just to understand like what is it that we're doing, what level of risk is there. So just pay attention to the processes that you typically have in those areas.
Personal computers, the internet, blockchain, all the other stuff, right? All these waves of technology. This wave feels a little bit different. Folks are more attuned to the human factors of it, right? Whether they all got scared because of Terminator or whatever, but just in general, for the tech people that I hang out with, I don't have to actually argue for, let's take a human-centered approach. That's coming more naturally to them than it has in the past, right? So that doesn't mean we're there and everything will be hunky-dory, but just in general, this wave feels a little bit different than some of the past waves.
Because of the client I'm working with and the maturity level of where they're at, like we're just trying to get people fired up about user research, not so much utilizing the tool so much. And I think they still have some concerns. Their policy indicates that like their developers are getting into it. They're creating sandboxes to experiment with data. They're primarily a product intelligence company. So there's a lot of cool things happening there. We are working on a chatbot, an AI chatbot, and I think that's exciting versus what we've seen the last whatever years of like, here's 3 options that what I think you're asking me. Here's 3 things to click on. This might be relevant to what you're asking. It's getting more elaborate, and it's starting to feel more like you're, your point, Brian, about like, am I interacting with a human right now or a machine? It's not always completely obvious, which that transparency of that is key, I think. So yeah, my limitations there are my client as far as working with this stuff. Even with Miro, they have some tools in there now, like you can grab sticky notes and there's a sentiment tool in there. I've asked like 2 or 3 times, can we use this? Because Miro has their AI policy listed. I haven't gotten an answer, so I'm like, I really want to try this out, but like I can't. I click this button. It's very frustrating.
Client hasn't approved the use, just to clarify.
Correct. Yeah. So they've got a couple tools in there, and it's something I probably need to look at home, I guess. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with design thinking and things like that at this point. We're creating a lot of huge research reports. We're kind of going old school. Just to kind of prove it out that this is valuable.
What have been, I guess, some of your biggest wins to date? And I guess in addition to that, like how do you measure success on those?
So I don't know the exact reference, but some folks at MIT have started doing research, and they had like one group use ChatGPT and another group not. And they controlled the experiment, and they're getting data that yes, ChatGPT saved time and improved quality, right? So there's actually some research that's coming out that shows that some of the hype is true, right? So these tools can be useful. So I think they'll be, again, from a business perspective, there'll be a lot of like, just show me the numbers, right? If the numbers save me $1 million a year, I don't care if it's AI or I don't care if it's a broom and a baseball bat. I'll take it, right? So, but for me, the more interesting sort of successes are the ones that tug at your heartstrings. So. I forget the name of the app, but it was developed in Cincinnati based on data from the Cincinnati Children's Hospital. They took all this data that they had around words that people used when they were contemplating suicide, right? And they made a model in it. They embedded it into an app that social workers can use, when they're interviewing people. Right? They just have the phone sitting there and the app is running and it's recording it. And after the session, it sort of gives you a score. It helps the social worker determine how much at risk they are of being a suicide victim. Right? So to me, that's when I went to the event, this AI forum in Cincinnati. Right? That's the one that that all of the executives in the room, that made them all cry. Right? So again, we need to make sure we make the financial statement, but for this stuff, if we really are going to change humanity, we've got to pull on some of the emotional heartstrings too as successes.
Cool. So yeah, we've done some things that are kind of in that crying, make the world better category. We did a project with Dell and Intel where we partnered with a startup that was using voice technology, which that's actually advanced a lot since just the time that we did it. But it was designed for a group of MMD patients that after diagnosis within 6 to 9 months, 90% lose the ability to speak. So the creative team wrote a book. So literally by reading the book, it captured all the phrases that you needed to actually train a voice model. Now it seems like you can train a voice model in about 15 minutes. With a handful of phrases, but at that point that we were doing that program, it was still taking hours, and the majority of people weren't actually doing the work. On the crazy side, we just did something with Virgin Voyages where their chief celebration officer is Jennifer Lopez. So the creative team did this tongue-in-cheek Gen AI spoof. Part of it was just the big television commercial where kind of people were having fun with pretending to be J-Lo. And then we actually did something where we used generative to allow a person to invite a friend to a celebration. So you could put in your name, put in your friend's name, and you'd actually get a personal invitation from J-Lo to come on the ship to celebrate a birthday or what have you. Like the generative portion of that, super narrow and very safe. She obviously is very concerned about her image. So we had to make sure that when you think about brand safety, it's not just Virgin, but it was her that we needed to make sure sounded good, looked good, and actually we're super transparent in adding little glitches so people knew when the generative portion was even there as part of the experience. So yeah, we've been sort of all over the board. I do think a story that I like to tell is years ago we built, before the large language model era, we did something for Tennessee tourism. The creative team wanted to prove that every musical artist was within 6 degrees of the state of Tennessee, a la 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. So they wanted to build a data model that actually proved it. So we ingested a few different music databases and then figured out how to prove that point. But I always like that example because it paired up the geeks and the storytellers very tightly, because it wasn't just about showing the answer but telling the story in a way that made people want to come to the state of Tennessee, because it's about, we had to weave place into those responses to make sure that was there. So I think for us, AI is more kind of the means than the end, although it does seem like we're starting to get some briefs where it's like, use AI. But generally speaking, like we're trying to book cruises, or we're trying to save time, or you're trying to convert more people on a website. So you have to understand the thing that you're trying to accomplish and then figure out where AI helps you do that in a better way.
So hopefully this resonates with some people in the room, but I think the industry data, and this might be a little outdated, maybe a couple months, is that in the IT industry, at least 30% of the people surveyed have played with AI tools. That seems pretty low. We did a Cincy Delivers conference panel a couple months ago, and we polled the room, and we got the same results, roughly 30% of the people, and these are developers. So on that, my success story is I'm actually trying to keep up with this stuff a little bit, given like what I talked about with kind of the restrictions I have at my current client. The task force we created working on experiments, educating myself on the different tools that are out there that are emerging, and the other ethical type of things that I've dug into as well, puts me in, I think, a pretty good place. But I think, like Keith mentioned, or Brian, I can't remember, like, we're all kind of on the same page to some extent with this stuff. We did have a machine learning specialist of 20 years in the audience at the last panel, who kind of schooled us a little bit harshly. So there's that too. I by no means like a specialist with this stuff, and I think a lot of people are just kind of in a place like, what is this we're working with here? And like Keith said, this feels different. It's a different type of interaction. I graduated college in '97, so I was there when the internet was like, people were asking the same question, like, should our company use this? What is this? So it's a good time to be in this industry. There's a lot of unknowns, and that's kind of cool. It's also kind of scary sometimes with some of the stuff that's coming out with this technology as far as what it could do. Not Terminator 2, Judgment Day type stuff necessarily, but like a tool came out recently, or I don't know if it's out yet, but it changes your language. Not only your language, but also it records your face and your lips move according to the language that you're speaking. That's Tower of Babel stuff. That was kind of like, it's not a good idea. So it'll be interesting to see like where we're at in 5 or 10 years from now with this stuff.
I think it's almost deceptive how easy the prompt window looks. So one, like as a room of designers, never let anybody tell you that design doesn't matter, again, because that just adding a prompt window to interact with a data model, that simplicity got it to 100 million users, almost overnight. So super powerful. The flip side of that is it's also super scary. So it's easy across very large companies for people to forget what they're doing, to forget what level of privacy or protection they should have of either their personal data or the data for their clients. So bravo that you're very thoughtful about even just thinking about a feature that exists in Miro and whether it's okay to use that. I don't know that everybody has that same level of fear or risk, and I think the simplicity kind of masks the complexity of what's underneath and the potential risks that exist around that. So I guess my fear is more so like, who doesn't know or should be more aware and more cautious in the ubiquity of the tools, not just the big ones and the major things that we're throwing out, but the one-offs that are popping up for design and research and copywriting, or the features that are coming into all the tools that we already use day to day. It's hard to keep up as people. It's hard to keep up as data and IT security and legal to actually review and look at all that stuff. So yeah, just be cautious and just be mindful about it. I would say definitely professionally, but also personally, like just be aware. Like if something is trying to say they want to be your personal AI and take all your data and be the assistant in your pocket, like what are they actually giving them? What are you getting back? Is that balance right? Because everybody's still trying to figure out their economic model, and we're still kind of suffering the consequences of the economic model of the social era. So it's a little bit scary what the potential could be in this next phase, and I don't know that we know what all those consequences are. So it's good to be cautious, I would say, personally and professionally.
Yeah, I'm not too concerned of companies having unintended consequences. We didn't plan on that one, so that's going to happen, and they'll deal with it. I'm more concerned with all the bad people out there that are going to use AI to do very bad things, right? So that, again, that means, getting governments to understand this so that they can, they may be able to prevent some of those things that us as individuals or individual companies can't. So that's my biggest fear. Not that AI is going to wipe us out, but some group of people with AI is going to wipe us out. So
yeah, there was somebody, this is not my theory, but I heard somebody say that any emerging technology, like it's a WTF theory, the worst things first, that it will be used to make all the bad things that are around us worse in the beginning. And if we're lucky, the technology will survive that first wave and we can actually get to the good stuff. I think AI is very much in that phase. I'm scared to think about what will be created in the coming year. But by people not in the industry, but just because it's open and available, the open source community. The models are getting smaller. It's getting easier to just do things on your own. So that's both really exciting in terms of the access and just terrifying in terms of what they'll do. The hard part is I don't know that we know the impact in terms of the economic models. I would say like short term, I do agree, every company I feel like I'm talking to has efficiency on their mind. They think there's an AI easy button that you just plug AI into things and suddenly you're going to save millions of dollars. In some cases, like the repetitive tasks, I think there are spots that you can get to efficiency super fast. When we're doing a lot of the Gen AI press, a lot of them were surprised that it took more humans to do that, not less. It wasn't something that we just plugged in. Honestly, there's some of our creative teams that probably thought that we could just plug in and immediately get this beautiful JLo that was coming out on the other side. So I think it's going to take some time. I do think long term there is the risk of jobs. Optimistically, I think it has potential to augment what makes us great and automate the tasks that are pains in the butt. But the economics of figuring that out across a lot of different industries is going to be really challenging. And the whole question of even just IP, work IP, and how much of you does work own? Like there will be whole sets of questions that I don't even know that we've fully thought about yet. Like I'm on Teams a lot. So Microsoft has my voice, my image, all the text chats that I do. Like in theory, there's plenty of it to train, like virtual Brian that could answer almost anything that I would answer and would probably do a pretty good job. But does work own that version of me? Do I? So there's a whole bunch that's just in just the, not just actors, but like your likeness and your work. That a lot of that's got to get sorted out, and I feel for the regulators because I don't know how they're going to solve for that stuff, and that's what's scary to me is like I think we're about to enter the next wave of the AI wars. Like the first version when Bing decided they were going to come out, everybody had to embrace and get things out, and it was frightening that we were doing all the training of the models, like we were their testers, 100 million people interacting with ChatGPT to tell them what was wrong. And I feel like we're getting into that phase with copilots now, and we'll enter new waves when new other features come. So, but yeah, hopefully the economic questions and all the hard questions we'll figure out as we go.
I have the tendency of trying to compare this to something else, like when the auto industry emerged and people that drove people around on horse and carriage were like, what's going to happen to my job? Well, they probably bought a car, hopefully. But this doesn't feel the same. There's a lot of like ambiguity about what this means. So that comparison kind of sucks to a large degree because I can't say like that's what will happen. It happened in the auto industry. The only thing I can think of with this question, because it comes up a lot, is there's really three options. Stay in this industry and keep up to date with what's happening. Pretend it's not here as the second option and stay in this industry, or leave this industry. But to the question, like I don't know what industry is secure from this as far as that goes. And so for me, like I'm not really concerned about that. I don't have fears about that. It's kind of an exciting time to be in this industry and kind of being able to explore this stuff. So that's really like when people ask me that, nobody knows really. There are industries that are being impacted by this, obviously. But there's a lot of exciting things going on with where I work and the client that I'm working with right now, slowly. And so, yeah, it's definitely a question to keep asking. But I don't think anyone has the magic answer to that one yet.
I was going to use the automotive example, right? So the technology displaces workers all the time, right? So the first wave was, in agriculture, and then you had sort of blue collar jobs being replaced with different blue collar jobs, right? You went from the buggy whip to the automotive industry or whatever, right? Then as we started automating more, blue collar jobs got replaced with white collar jobs, right? So then it's like, and so there's data like, yes, we eliminated 20 dirty, stinky blue collar jobs, but we created 50 supposedly nicer white collar jobs, right? So this, again, this way feels a little bit different because now the technology is going to replace white collar work, office work, and we don't even have a label. Is it green collar? I don't know what the next collar is after white collar, right? We don't even have a label for it, but something like that's going to happen. It's going to mean, in theory, people have more free time, right? Which means that, they can have vacation or spend time with their kids or volunteer or do other things. Because again, my AI at work is doing 80% of the work and I just have to oversee it for 20%. So, 40-hour work week is not much, right? So what are we going to do with the rest of our time? Hopefully not do bad things, right? So, but again, this has happened before, but again, every time you're in the middle of it, it feels like it's new. 1,000 years from now, we'll look back and it was obvious what was going to happen next. But for us right now, I don't know. So.
I'm not a historian on this, but AI has been around for a while. That's the thing to keep in mind. This isn't new necessarily. The new thing here is it's generative. It creates conversational responses. There's improvements on it. So that's really the only way I can answer that one is AI's been around, and some of it's even now kind of hacky, kind of just hokey, Microsoft Forms, I did a search. Sometimes it's easier to search, even though you have Office 365, go through the search engine to get there versus trying to find it in the menu. That's another topic. So I did that, and it was AI-generated forms. They haven't really done much in there. You can it feeds up backgrounds for your survey that you're creating or your form. It's not super amazing. So there's a lot of different flavors of AI out there. This one's big that's happened late last year, and people are still kind of responding to it and trying to make sense of it. As to how OpenAI created this, I don't know. I hear they scraped the entire internet. Where that lives or how they're managing that, I have no idea. Maybe I don't want to know. I don't know.
The things that make this wave of AI different, one is the internet and all this data, right? We have this data. If you don't have that data in the past, all the work was compiling that data and putting it into the model and everything. And now there's just a ton of content, information, and data to work with. Second is a lot of computing power, right? So how do they do it? They just poured a lot of money into a data center sitting in the middle of Texas or something, and it munched away for a year, right? Because you see, this model cost $1 million to develop. That's mostly electricity cost, right? To run the computers to do all the math, because the model is just this huge math problem, right? And then the last little part is the part that we care about is now it's easy enough to use, right? So enough other things have happened now that we found that we might actually be able to use it for something useful. So we put effort into not just having a bunch of engineers in the basement being able to use it. We made it easy for everybody to use. So those are the three things that sort of came together for me. But I'm not a historian, so I just made that up.
I found an interesting article on Nielsen Norman with their website. They did a usability testing study on ChatGPT. And when I first used ChatGPT, it was this is so amazing. I bypassed all of the UX issues with that thing. But there are issues with utilizing that. Now that I read that article, I'm yeah, they could have done better here. But that wasn't the selling point for that thing. And so they got away with that. But it was, I think, the tools that we're actually using for this stuff is going to improve as we move along.
It still needs to be a lot easier to use and a lot more intuitive. But
right, yeah.
We hit some hurdle in the past.
Yeah.
It just didn't work.
Yeah, things I asked this question up here, and now I got to reference that somehow for my new question and kind of tying that together, tying the conversation together in a way that makes sense with what I'm asking and making sure I'm getting the right output is kind of clunky still. So I'm looking forward to better experiences interacting with this stuff as it moves forward. So a couple of things come to mind. I'm reading a book called Dark Data because I don't know a lot about data and I'm a researcher, so it kind of has a twofold effect of I'm interacting with tools that are giving me data, and so there's dark data. So there's 15 different principles around this. I don't know that there's data missing. I do know that there's data missing, but I'm gonna there's all kinds of different approaches to that. And so interacting with these tools, that's going to be something to keep in mind of like what's missing here. It's a interesting book. Another is IBM has I think it's a free course. I forgot what platform it's on, but if you search for it, you'll find it. It has kind of a 101 level AI course. I haven't read any AI specific books, guilty. I've been more interested in kind of playing with the tools than reading books about AI. It's moving so fast that I feel like by the time I finish it,
If you were in a master's HCI program, for example, and you're going to take a class in human-centered AI, this would like be your textbook, okay? Written by Ben Schneiderman. He's one of the gurus in the field. Again, lots of it's out of date. There's a website that goes with it, but again, this focuses on the human aspect of it. So again, I can centered AI part of it. There's other folks using human-centered AI in slightly different ways, but this would be the textbook to answer to your question. Oh, it's called Human-Centered AI. By Ben Schneiderman. It's like a year old or 2 years old. So again, he wrote half of it before ChatGPT and the other stuff. But again, if it's a good textbook, it'll last a little bit longer. So,
I spent a lot, in addition to the IBM, like Google, Microsoft, Amazon. Like there are lots of platforms that have very, very good, just basic AI content that's available. Andreessen Horowitz actually has a great AI component that gets into how they think about it, how they think about monetization around that, and a lot of good references to some of the white papers if you want to geek out that started to spark this era and where we are. So, and then there's a massive amount of amazing talks just on YouTube, right? Like I end up listening to that when I'm running or working out, just trying to absorb, like, because it's changing so quickly. I think that's one of the hardest parts is just keeping up with the rate of speed. So I do try to filter through X, Twitter, whatever that is, which is painful, and then a ton of stuff on YouTube and a lot of the tech pubs.
Someone recommended a documentary, a presentation called The AI Dilemma. And it's by the same guys, I think, that did The Social Dilemma, if you've seen that on Netflix. They kind of dig into the ethics and kind of the dark pockets where things could head if you're not kind of heads up about that stuff. It's like an hour long. It's really good. It's on YouTube, so it's worth watch.
And thanks again. We are going to be partnering with AIGA. We'll be a part of the Design Week festivities. So we're going to have a panel on accessibility, and just stay tuned to either Meetup or Eventbrite, whichever platform you're using, and we'll have that information out soon.